Okay. Good day, everyone. We are here again with another show with a very cool and interesting panel. We are here with Alizadeh of Jadal TV. For those of us who are English speaking, I think you have also a Jadal English channel, which I think is a very interesting, high quality discussion of things related to geopolitics, anti-imperialism. Very good stuff. I also saw you recently on Max Blumenthal with a few discussions, which are also very worth looking into. And we have another guest, Kit Klarenberg, also, by the way, part of the Gray Zone, but you also have your own Substack, Kit Klarenberg, doing fantastic journalistic work. You predicted some of the things that are actually going on right now in Iran and West Asia in general. So both of you, welcome on our little channel.
Indeed, welcome.
Thank you very much, Karim, and thank you very much, Peter, for inviting me. And I say hi to Keith, who I have a lot of respect for his work.
Yeah, right back at all of you. We live in interesting times.
Indeed. I try to make myself feel a little better with the old line from Mao about everything under heaven being in chaos. Therefore, the situation is excellent. But it's been very difficult to follow all of this, and it's still difficult for me to ask you both. But nonetheless, could you provide the viewers a bit of an update on the war? I don't know. It's really hard to talk about, but it seems like without enough of a pain point for the U.S. administration, which could come from destruction of U.S. military bases, or seemingly more likely from a negative market reaction, we won't have an end to this mass murder campaign. I know I'm kind of loading the dice with that question. You can see what I'm kind of hoping for in your answer, but just forget that. And could you provide just a general update as to the best of your knowledge in the fog of war? Where do we currently stand?
Maybe we can start with Ali.
Okay. Today is Friday. Is it 6th of March? So we're coming to a week of U.S. and Israel's illegal and illegitimate attack and attack on Iran, starting with assassination of Ayatollah Khamenei. And they just announced that last night U.S. and Israel had the heaviest bombardment of Tehran. Pete Hegseth said, this is just the beginning. We are just going to use ammunition stronger and stronger. It seems that they finally used Buster bunker bomb in a city of 10 million. And while it's very alarming, because we are not dealing with normal states here. We are dealing with one state which was proved in front of the eyes of billions of people to be absolutely genocidal state, and the other one, which is Trump, which has no red line, as Pete Hegseth said proudly, and is assisting genocide assistant. So it's alarming, and I'm really worried about people in Tehran. So while from one side I have one eye crying, but at the same time, I have a knowledge that this is going to be last war for a while. And I believe Donald Trump is just digging his grave, and it's not a slogan. If you just allow me for a couple of minutes to explain the logic behind this war, you understand that you should not follow this war through the media and the news timeline. You should understand it through reading a bit of history of Iran and understanding the nature of this revolutionary state. So look at what they've achieved in the last week with all their beautiful B-2s and beautiful F-35s and all the intels that they have. The biggest achievement is assassinating an 86 years old man with one hand, because he had lost his other hand in assassination of terrorist MEK group, which is waiting on the border on the order of Americans to enter Iran back in 80s. And was it a victory? Soon after the assassinating him and they were celebrating, they realized that the man walked into his own assassination and he had choreographed his own assassination in order to ignite and to allow explosion of revival of a revolutionary energy. And that's what we see in Iran now. Assassination of Ayatollah Khamenei reversed and neutralized a lot of military and hybrid warfare strategies of Israel and America planned for in the last few years, because they had spent billions of dollars on media warfare, on social media warfare, on sanctions in order to divide the society from within, turning Ayatollah Khamenei into this demonic, despotic figure who is ruling the country against his will. And so the people were waiting for a liberator to come from outside. And suddenly, Khamenei, the Shaheed, while he was fasting in the holy months of Ramadan, reverberating and echoing all the symbolism of Shiite religion, deified him and forced people to come to the street, clarified all the confusions made with the fog of social media warfare, and what happened back in January. That's number one. A victory which really soon, less than 24 hours later, turned out to be the biggest mistake they did so far. Second victory, they killed 100 Iranian Navy men. Bravo. But then soon after that, the news came out that they were not even armed. They were not carrying any ammunition. They were invited by Indian government for a parade there, and they were not acting as Navy. They were just going to like Navy parades in India. That's the second one. And the third one, they killed 185 students in Mina. Bravo. I mean, this is the three biggest achievements of American Israelis so far. And now they are doing carpet bombing of Tehran and using a bunker buster bomb in a city. So why they're doing this? Because Trump was sold a war with a narrative that you can win it in a weekend. And the regime is weak, people hate it. All these like young, beautiful women that they had in the Western capitals doing YMCA were depicted to him as the Iranian people inside Iran waiting for Trump. And so he could go back to his office on Monday morning announcing a victory. And they told him that there are many Delcy Rodriguez waiting inside the state for you. One, he didn't know that the state actually is not Venezuelan state. And because the revolutionary base is very powerful at the moment, and IRGC is an organization of 400,000 people without a single precedent of defection in its 47 years history, a force so consolidated that you cannot penetrate it at all. They're all many of them coming from the experience of 8 years war, and the rest of them are children of martyrs of the war, brothers of the martyr of the war, families of the martyrs of war. So people who've already paid so much price that there is no return for them. So in a sense, this assassination and this war actually changed the balance of forces inside the state. Without this war, maybe Trump could have looked for Delcy Rodriguez. But right now, all the Delcy Rodriguezes of Iran are sidelined so bad. And if they come and open their mouths, the people on the streets will destroy them, arrest them, and take them over. So in a sense, he destroyed the balance of power of a country which was very pluralistic. I've said in Max Blumenthal's show before that Iran is a divided state. There are pro-Western faction. There are like more realist revolutionary faction. But the pro-Western faction haven't opened their mouths since this thing, because they know they're finished. They're finished. In a country with a war, you're not going to have people who come and talk about surrender or come and talk about negotiation. Where are Javad Zarifs of Iran? They don't dare to come to the fore because people will tear them apart. So that's one other mistake. And as I said, he forced people to rethink as well inside the country, and he changed that balance of power. So let me just tell you what's going to happen. Iran is very patient and is looking at this war to be not only weeks, but months and months. And Iranians have prepared themselves for this moment. So, at least, as I said, I'm really sad, but I'm not surprised because Iranians are not, Iranian state is not surprised. If they are using bunker buster to hit Iranian missile cities, dark, deep underground, they can do it. But Iranians knew that. So they distributed their missile depots and silos across the country. And Americans even don't know where they are. And even if they had the clear map of every location in which the missiles have been redistributed, they needed like 20 years ammunition to be able to hit them. And so Americans have to and Israelis have to accelerate the war, and they have to like intensify constantly because they know that they are running against time, because they know that in 2 weeks' time they run out of anti-air defense and they run out of the Thud and Patriots, and then that's the time that Iranians just starting the war. For Iran, this is just a warm-up. This is just a starter. They've been very patiently hitting the American radars in the region. They've been like exhausting and depleting their anti-air defense, and they haven't even started. Last night, we saw a bit of Khorramshahr missile, which is a cluster missile divided into like 80 different parts, and they're just kind of playing with them. They haven't started. But the other side, I promise you, if this morning, according to Americans, they have used bunker buster bomb, I promise you that in a week time, desperate Trump will come and will give implicit threat, or maybe even explicit threat of nuclear attack to Iran, because he has no other way. He has no other way. He knows he cannot. He's not ready for a 5 weeks war or 7 weeks war. He's not ready. He has no ammunition. No one in the world has this ammunition, because Iranians for the last 30 years have prepared themselves for this moment with very inexpensive weapons, with very inexpensive missiles, inexpensive drones, for this very, very moment, for a war of attrition and depletion.
Yes, yes. Well said. And I totally agree with you. I remember when the Ayatollah was killed, and I immediately said also to Peter, I said this cannot be an accident. This must have been some last sacrifice that was on purpose. And on the strategic miscalculation, you could say, and the threat of nuclear attack, I'm also extremely worried about that, especially considering the Epstein class and Netanyahu being behind Trump as well. I read your article, Kit, and you already said quite a while ago that this is a strategic miscalculation. You predicted also the kind of warfare that would happen, such as attacking the bases in the region. Do you still think the same? Do you still see that it's a strategic miscalculation? And do you also share Ali's worry that it may go nuclear because of that miscalculation?
Well, I mean, I'd like to echo much of what Ali said, very boringly, but no, it was excellent insight and analysis. I mean, I think that number one, I don't want to overly romanticize Iran's resistance, because ultimately innocent people, including children, are being killed, which is absolutely horrific. By the same token, I think that Iran has already demonstrated an extraordinary resilience, and has achieved many successes, which I don't think anyone, even people who knew that Iran was not a kind of defenseless basket case punching bag, I think that it's caught a lot of people off guard, and for all of the bombing of civilian sites in Iran and in Tehran and other major Iranian cities, it must be borne in mind that the IRGC, they've shut down the airspaces of multiple countries. They have sent the global economy into a very highly deleterious tailspin. They are striking at the heart of CIA and US military installations throughout the region. It's pretty spectacular, and I think that yes, the US and the Israelis significantly underestimated Iran's strength. They bumbled into this. with high on their own hype and hubris, and it's coming back to bite them. Now, that does sadly, raise the very real prospect that nuclear war could be impending, or a drastic escalation when things go really sour for the Judeo-Americans, because they are painted into a corner now, and it's quite a dangerous one, and there's very little that they can do to quote unquote correct the situation. So I mean, we see desperate attempts to try and get a Kurdish invasion force together, because the US is incapable, without suffering significant losses and costs, of getting US troops anywhere near Iran. And now, like, the Atlantic published an extensive report on how there are supposedly thousands of Kurdish Iranian militants gathering in Iraqi territory, and they are preparing to swoop in on in Iran. However, the same report interviewed numerous think tank apparatchiks, including people who represent the rabidly Zionist Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and also quote-unquote pro-democracy Iranian diaspora activists based in the US and other Western countries. And universally, they all said that this was going to be a completely suicidal disaster if it went ahead. Yet the Atlantic signed off by saying, despite all of this, it looks like the battle is going ahead. I mean, it's complete, it's desperate, flailing, grasping. Quite clearly, it was expected that yes, Iran would fold after a few days of bombing, a completely idiotic and very dangerous miscalculation. And now it appears that the US, Israel, and Iran are in for the very long haul. Now, when the US and Israeli air interceptors and missile interceptors are spent, which could be, in a few days. I can't imagine it would last much longer than a week, really, despite the fact they're scraping the barrel and depriving their allies the world over of, these military resources. At that stage, a decision has to be made about what to do next. Now, I mean, the Israelis have been very forthright about their objectives in Tehran. And I read a Financial Times report, which likewise said that a Kurdish invasion would be a total disaster, but is still going ahead anyway. There was a number of people interviewed, including a nameless Zionist entity military intelligence officer, who said, we want to ensure Iran stays in disarray. We're seeking total destruction of the quote-unquote regime, of the pillars of the regime, including the IRGC and its the Iran's strategic capabilities. And we couldn't care less about the future or Iran's stability. We want to destroy Iran to such an extent that we will not have to fight another round. We want to finish the job now, which is quite extraordinary that they've gone into this with that objective, and they've not even really bothered to make much of an effort to hype up Iran as a threat in the manner of, say, like the Iraq War or other conflicts old and new waged by the US, whether on Israel's behalf or otherwise. They're just going ahead with doing this. It's enormously damaging to, Israel already is the most reviled country in the world, and the US government is doing itself no favors, whether at home or abroad, by doing this. So, it does speak to a determination to, yes, finish the job now, quote unquote. And given that all of that, they have no good options for achieving that, a decision could be made to go nuclear. By the same token, I think it cannot be ruled out that Iran is extremely well equipped with. We haven't even seen the full extent of their capabilities yet, and Iranian officials have explicitly said we're entering a new phase of the war, and you're going to see what our hypersonic and ballistic missiles can do. This could include anti-nuclear operations. They could be striking at the Israel's Dimona plant, which is the kind of core of their nuclear program, if they feel sufficiently threatened. It must be stressed that Iran's ballistic and hypersonic missiles cannot be countered because they move so quickly and they're so sophisticated. And by contrast, we're seeing how actually ineffectual US missiles and interceptors are. There's a lot of failure, and as well, they've been reduced to trying to use fighter jets, extremely expensive, extremely fragile, it seems, fighter jets to try and shoot down missiles. And already several planes have been downed, and the US doesn't seem particularly keen to advertise this, or indeed their battle losses. I've seen some estimates that it's several hundred, if not into the thousands, of US soldiers and intelligence personnel who've lost their lives or been injured, contrary to the official claim there's only 3 or 4 people. So yeah, I mean, things are one way or another about to get very interesting, for want of a better word. But by the same token, I strongly believe that Iran, at both the state and public level, is ready to stick this out, because it's gone so far. And I think, the assassination of Ayatollah Khomeini, during Ramadan, I mean, in terms of an insult and blight on the Iranian people and the Iranian nation, but also just Shias, the world over, there is an enormous amount of anger and retributive sentiment that this has triggered throughout West Asia and the Arab and Muslim world. And we're seeing Bahrain on fire, Pakistan, US embassies are getting attacked. So I mean, as much as I do worry about the threat of escalation, the US has bitten off more than they can chew, to say the least. There are no good ways out of this, and even if they succeed in neutralizing Iran, which I think is extremely unlikely, they will be battered and bruised and in a state of permanent decline within West Asia, and I think in most of their other areas of hegemony, because their brutality and their sadism couldn't be writ larger. I mean, this has done an enormous disservice to perceptions of the US the world over. If you look at polls throughout Europe, there are. I mean, even in Germany, where you've had successive highly Russophobic and quite deranged governments that have issued endless kind of almost genocidal statements about Russia and Russians since the start of the special military operation in February 2022. If you look at polls, the US and Israel are viewed not much more positively than Russia. Currently, they're not trusted. They are, they're not remotely popular, and the same is true, everywhere. And a large number of US vassals and allies, quote unquote, are in a very serious bind. In Britain, there is enormous pressure on Keir Starmer to respond to supposed Iranian attacks on their bases in Cyprus, which have led to the shutdown of Cyprus airspace. But by the same token, if you look at polls, overwhelmingly people oppose vehemently any British involvement, whether direct or indirect, in the conflict, the Judeo-American conflict against Iran. That will cause, if Britain does go ahead with this, it will cause a welter of domestic problems. And already Keir Starmer's government is the least popular in British history, and there's a revolutionary fervour, in the air. So we shall see. But I think in the final analysis, in the spirit of the deluge, which is what Lloyd George referred to the First World War as in 1917, this has unleashed all manner of forces that Western politicians cannot control, let alone stop. And we're already living in a very different world where the calculus in so many regards has irrevocably changed.
Yeah. Just a quick follow-up on something that both of you pointed out, the rage felt as a result of the assassination. I was listening to a right-wing military expert discuss the situation, particularly the lack of advanced munitions on the U.S. side, which of course Trump denied in his typical manner, which I think means that it's definitely true that they are running out of the missile interceptors, a lot of their so-called smart bombs, etc. And so this right-wing military expert was suggesting that the smartest thing for Trump to do would be to simply say, well, we succeeded at assassinating the supreme leader, so that's it. It's over. We gave the Iranian people their chance to rise up and overthrow their government, so we'll just leave at this point. So my question is, even if Trump were smart enough to cut his losses and run, do you think that the Iranian government would accede to that sort of a ceasefire or even end to hostilities?
Is it to me or is it to Kit?
I guess start with you. Yeah.
Okay. No. Again, I think Trump has been pushed to a corner and he's been duped, and now he has no way to go left or right. Iranians cannot rationally and logically accept a ceasefire because if they do that, they will be left with a broken country because Israel is not only bombing headquarters of IRGC or security forces. Yesterday, they bombed 4 or 5 pharmaceutical sites. So Iran will not be able to produce its paracetamol for a while. So, and they know that Israel has come to destroy the country, number one. Number two, there are continuation of sanctions. So Iran will be left with a broken economy and a region in which in a half-baked war are going to be like suspicious about Iran, and a deterrence which is not going to be is not fully restored. Iran will have no chance and choice to continue this war until its deterrence is properly restored for decades. Otherwise, it will be destroyed in a different way. Iran has already been in a war of attrition by America's sanctions for the last 20 years, 15 years. So internally is exhausted. Iran's deterrence needs to be restored enough for countries like China and Russia to be able to come and invest in it. Right now, no one would invest in a country which can be bombed in another 6 months. In 6 months' time, Israel will go and kind of mesmerize Trump again and deceive him again, and it's going to be another war. No, the deterrence has to be restored. Otherwise, the moment the war is ended, the country is prone to have many internal problems. Then those Rodriguez's can come. It can be like organic uprising, bread riots, and other issues. So I don't think Iranians will stop now, especially now that America has done such a damage. Second, given the assassination of Ayatollah Khamenei and the mood in the country, they will lose the base. And the base for the state is important. That 10 million people you see on the streets are not only like American base, in which they are important for polls and voting. No, they are part of Iran's larger army. Now you were talking about Kurds. And Trump has asked people to come and do uprising again. So he means city warfare in a way that we had in Syria. So who is going to neutralize them? IRGC doesn't have full power to do that. That base is the one who is already armed. Many of them already have picked up weapon, and they're going to act as a militia force, stopping the insurgents and defend the country. So you don't want to alienate the force at this stage, because the country depends on them both on a military way and also on political way. But I'm just going to add few clarification, because we talked about a strategic miscalculation. I don't think that was a miscalculation. I think that was false analysis, which was fed in a very engineered way into Trump's administration. There was an army of think tanks in Washington. There was an army of journalists, army of influencers online who worked together over the last 18 months, selling this false narrative that Iran is weak, and Iran is weak, that Iranian people are ready for uprising, the popularity of the state is low, and Iran is like inside the state, there are so many people willing to make the deal with the United States. So all these false analysis coming from FDD, coming from YNEP, coming from other kinds of institutions were engineered by Israelis and by Tel Aviv to deceive Donald Trump and Trump's administration's absolute lack of understanding of Iran. I don't think it's embarrassing that this administration, I think, lacks information about Iran, and their knowledge of Iran and how the system works is less than a first year BA of political science student in the worst university. It's absolutely, it is really, what happened in Iraq in 2003 is dwarfed by what happened in this war last week. So that's number one. Number two, look at that. Trump is hopping from one delusion to the next delusion. Delusion number one, we assassinate Khamenei, the state will collapse. In 2 days' time, we go and take it over. It didn't work. Delusion number two, we're going to intensify the work on the attacks and the bombardments, and the people will tell off the state and they will come to uprising. Didn't work. Illusion number three, the Kurds will come and they will slowly weaken the western borders. They drag part of IRGC force to the west border, and so we can have insurgencies in other cities and exhaust the Iranian army. It's not going to work either, because why? They are sending Kurds to meat grinder. This is suicidal. The same way they send young people with no military expertise on 8th and 9th of January to meat grinder, they told them to go and take over police stations. And of course, that's obvious what's going to happen to you. If you just go and try to take police station, you're going to be shot, because they want to create a big number of casualties and dead. They are doing the same thing with Kurds. So I'm sure if Kurdish forces, those Kurdish forces who have any sense and they have some historical roots, are not joining this campaign. But a lot of these other Kurdish forces, which are much younger and are much more suspicious, they are more connected to Tel Aviv. They are not the traditional organic ones who've been around for many years. So number two, Iran has fought a war with Kurdish separatists before in 1980s. They are very used to it and they are accustomed to it. And also Iran is an expert of asymmetrical warfare, guerrilla warfare, because Iran is the one which taught Syria how to do it back between 2011 and 2018. So they are ready for it. When Abbas Araghchi, which was Javad Zarif's aide, so he's more a pragmatist. He's not a revolutionary. He's a pragmatist / liberal. When he said yesterday, let them come in. We are waiting for them. We are looking for them. We want to confront them. It tells you that Iran is prepared for this. But let me just add, the next stage, they're going to say Baluchi forces are going to come from southeast country, because if they can destabilize Baluchistan, that's very important, especially China's using Chabahar. India is using Chabahar. That's an important port for Russia, and they want to destabilize because the railway comes from Afghanistan. But Iran is prepared for Baluchi insurgents as well. So they prepared themselves for this. The scenario was so obvious for everyone that there is no surprise element in it. So I think they're going from one delusional to another one, and they're all coming from Israel. So let me just go to what Kit said about this article in of FT yesterday by Citrinovich, which said if it's going to be a coup, let me just read it from the text. He said, if we can have a coup, great, but you didn't have a coup, you failed. And then it says, if we can have people on the streets, great. And again, you failed on this one. If we can have a civil war, great. And I promise you, Iran is not a country to have civil war. Syria was established in 1948. Libya was established in 1952. Iraq was established in 1921. Iran, and I'm not going to be a nationalist, but Iran in its modern form, in a continuous way, without any interruption, was established in 1500 by Safavid dynasty. So as a modern state, has had the Kurdish problem for at least 526 years. So Iran is not the neighboring countries which they have the problem of national consolidation from within. Turkey was established in 1918. So Turkey has had the Kurdish problem as part and parcel of its national identity from day one. Iran has never had. Kurds are the oldest Iranian tribe. Kurds are Medes, which are like a pre-Achaemenid. So in a sense, within the Kurdish area, you're going to have a lot of forces to neutralize and fight back against those Kurdish forces who have been paid and recruited by Israel. So I think, again, this is another delusional scenario sold to America by Tel Aviv. And let me just tell you something. Citrinovich, in the same article by FT, says something which is very important. He says, that's the point of difference. He says, if we can have a civil war, great. Israel couldn't care less about the future or the stability of Iran. That's the point of difference between us and the US. I think Washington is more concerned about nation building and threats to their regional partners. So for years, we heard that Israel wants to divide Iran and balkanize Iran, but US doesn't want that because a balkanized Iran is not in the interest of Saudi, Qatar, Bahrain, and but look at that. It took 6 days for Trump to come out and say, we support Kurdish entrance to Iran. This man, the president of the United States, changed the decades-long strategy of US in a week time under pressure from Tel Aviv. This is unbelievable because for years, America said, a whole Iran, undivided Iran, which we can affect its political class without destroying it. Because if you destroy it, who is going to be in charge of the Strait of Hormuz? A divided and balkanized Iran means an 80 years old boy with a rocket launcher on his shoulder can close the Strait of Hormuz. A balkanized Iran means no one could use Saudi's economy, Bahrain's economy, Qatar's economy are going to go down the toilet because it's not going to be a stability for anyone. A Strait of Hormuz is 56 kilometers. Who's going to control it? Who can oversee the stability that no one is damaging it anymore? So I think the fact that America is changing its grand strategy only in a week shows how desperate they are and how much without this long-term strategy they came to this war.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Many good points. I think you have some comments, Kit, and I would also like to ask you, what do you think about what Ali just said about that? This strategy is probably mostly coming from pressure from Tel Aviv. Would you say that's the same? I heard that it's a lot of people are lately thinking that U.S. empire is mostly now being steered by Tel Aviv. How do you see how do you see these things?
Well, yeah, I mean, I just think that it's quite clear that as I and Ali have mentioned that the US got into this with a totally delusional picture of events on the ground, the realities on the ground, and the wider region, but also without any sense of what they're hoping to achieve. It was even in the lead up to the bombing starting. There were numerous mainstream reports, which the media at no point ever questioned the legality or morality of striking Iran. They did kind of sound notes of caution that, well, no clear rationale for doing this has been articulated by the president. Or any senior White House officials at all, and then you fast forward to today, and rather ashen-faced and grave U.S. lawmakers are emerging from private briefings where they're told about the necessity and the urgent the urgent necessity of crushing Iran, and they express kind of bewilderment that they're being told that lots of American soldiers are going to die, but the ultimate kind of objective and end goal and what post-war Iran and post-war West Asia looks like is not being communicated or seemingly even thought about. Given that, yes, the Israeli military intelligence officials have openly stated the goal is just complete and utter destruction, and probably yes, the balkanization of Iran and its descent into kind of a kind of post-Soviet intervention Afghanistan, of just total chaos and warlords, etc. That is just a completely insane and very, very dangerous strategy with no consideration whatsoever for the consequences, and they would be pretty dire. But also, I think it must be stressed that this is a completely delusional reading of the impact the war is having on the Iranian people. Now, I know several people, including journalists who anti-imperialist journalists who to an extent, were conned by this notion that, in the lead up to this, that the government, the revolutionary government in Iran is unpopular, and the streets are filled with people who hate the Islamic Republic, and blah blah, and therefore effectively endorsing the entire premise of this criminal war of aggression. But by the same token, we have seen in the wake of the killing of Khomeini and the various strikes in Iranian cities, millions of average Iranians taking to the street and screaming death to America. And I mean, if this message is not resonating in Washington or Tel Aviv or London or Brussels or other kind of imperial centers of power, it really should be. And I think that what in the miscalculations and terrible intelligence that this war was based on are all the more extraordinary, given I've reported on a report by the Institute for National Security Studies, which is a very influential Tel Aviv-based defense and security think tank. Now, in July 2025, it published a report that was openly advocating for regime change in Iran and setting out potential methods by which Israel could achieve this end. But then, in a bitter irony, most of the report was kind of attested to the implausibility of achieving such a goal. And one of the core things that the INSS observed was that while the 12-day war was an effort to instigate regime change, and Netanyahu on day 3 was talking about how this will collapse the government, and they're so unpopular, and there are millions of Iranians who want a free, democratic, liberal Iran. The report concedes that Iranians exhibited a notable degree, quote unquote, of rallying around the flag during that conflict, during which Israel got battered, it must be stressed, and also they exhibited a willingness to defend their homeland at a critical moment against an external enemy. And it adds that all traces of public dissent completely disappeared during the conflict, and that remains the case in the botched operations wake. There was no organized, structured opposition within or without the country capable of mobilizing protesters, let alone taking power. And it was a deeply traumatic national event for Iranians, which millions of younger generations who didn't live through the horrors of the US instigated Iran-Iraq war have now been exposed to the fact that the Islamic Republic is surrounded by enemies, it is under attack, and they effectively are pursuing a genocide. I mean, that's what they want. They want to turn Iran into Gaza 2.0 and just completely flatten it for no particular reason other than Iran is an independent country that dares to assert its interests and is a significant barrier to Judeo-American hegemony. And unchallenged hegemony in the wider region. And so, I've made this point on several podcasts, and I think it bears repeating, that from the perspective of the Iranians, both at a state and a public level, this is completely existential. Their very existence is threatened by the US and Israel. They're not going to back down. And they have been preparing for this for a very, very long time. Whereas from the US and Israeli perspective, this is a war of choice without clear objectives, without clear justifications, without actually the practical and tangible military assets and strength necessary to see it through. I mean, already the Strait of Hormuz, its closure has caused a absolute panic in the markets. It's completely shut down the kind of international and domestic facing facets of the Gulf economies. UAE, there's been mass brain drain, and the government is issuing guidance saying be extremely conservative with food, because there is a very real risk that that the UAE and other Gulf countries, which are overwhelmingly dependent on food exports to the extent it's 80 to 90% of their food comes from abroad, they're not going to be able to get basic essentials, and so for whatever misery Iran is suffering, and it cannot be underestimated, the Islamic Republic is demonstrating a willingness and ability to impose significant costs, not only on kind of comprador regimes in West Asia, but also on Europe as well. And that is a testament to their strength. If this is a waiting game, then I think that it does favour Iran, in the long term. And as I say, the US is going to be out of interceptors very, very, very soon. This will leave US bases and US allies in the region pretty much defenceless, and we'll see what happens when Iran starts striking those sites. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And I also recall, the words of Abbas Araghchi, who, in an interview recently, was asked how would Iran respond to the arrival of foreign soldiers on its territory. He responded, "Well, we're waiting for them." And I think that perspective is extremely widespread within Iranian society, and there are a countless number of people who would be willing to fight and die to defend their government if the US and Israel and the Kurds and whatever other proxy forces the empire can scrape together are foolish enough to try a direct incursion.
Yeah, you mentioned the market freak out. The market freak out has been much less than I had expected. It seems like basically the people comprising the market, which are overwhelmingly very wealthy people, not to give it epistemic powers that it doesn't really have, but they seem to be assuming that the war will be over relatively soon. And everything that both of you have said here today, and I would have to agree, I think probably Kareem does too, it does not seem like it will be over so soon. I'm really hoping that that taco theory proves true again. But Trump's going to need to see a much greater fall in the markets and an increase in the oil price and an increase in Treasury yields, I think, before he does chicken out. And then Ali points out, even if he does chicken out, that might not be sufficient. We haven't even gotten to half of a quarter, a tenth of the things we could possibly cover. But I want to ask a question of both of you, sort of on behalf of your average person who doesn't have multiple hours every day to, read multiple sources on the internet. How would you advise people, given the media environment that exists now, how would you advise them to best use their time and the sources they have available to try to pierce the fog of war and get a more accurate sense of what's going on beyond the various propaganda lines coming from the different players?
I think people should start from Wikipedia page, and that's exactly where Trump should have started. Looking at the size of the country, looking at the population of the country, and reading one page on the country's history. I'm not joking. I genuinely think Trump has not read Iran's Wikipedia page. Trump coming and saying that he wants to have what was the exact sentence? I must be involved in picking Iran's next leader. This is the most suicidal sentence coming out of an American president's mouth ever. This just destroyed his chance. If there was any section of Iranian society is still hesitant whether to side with the state or not, that sentence pushed them to go and side with the state. A country with 3,000 years history of statehood, you are telling that you want them to capitulate the way that Japan did after 2 atomic explosions. That's crazy. So I think everyone should read that. And if you read Iran's Wikipedia page, you understand it's 75 times bigger than Israel. You understand it's 12 times the population of Israel. And you understand that for the last 47 years, the country, because of this revolution and its insistence on being a sovereign, independent state, has been under isolation and sanction. And as a result, sanction and isolation has made Iran an autarkic country, self-sufficient, capable of making and engineering and manufacturing its own military equipment, and even becoming an export of military equipment. Iran, a country which was a vassal state of the United States before 1979, is one of the key players which helped Russia, exported military technology to Russia after the Ukraine war. And if Russia is not destroyed today, it's because it's using Iran's technology. Iran's military strategy is based on creating mass amount of very inexpensive drones and missiles, which allows the country to last for a very long time. Iran has definitely had many internal fractures and fault lines, which were all weaponized in the last 20 years by United States first, then came Saudi and early Ben Salman between 2012 to 2020, and then Israelis a lot. However, these fault lines are not deep enough to break the country. You talked about the violence of like January and how people were angry, but many people were like really angry with the state and they hate them. But you may hate like a member of your family, but you're not going to sit back to see them being lynched by a thug on the street. You may have a kind of domestic fight, but to what level? If you see that Israelis are coming, then that change, that bring them together. So that was another kind of thing that you have to learn from reading a kind of book, a kind of history book. One other thing that should have been mentioned here is the fact that this is like not only a war about Iran, it's not only about the regional war. And as I said before, Iran is not fighting on its own behalf, it's fighting to liberate the region from this endless expansion of Zionism, which has become a problem for many countries. Now we have a massive issue of Arab Zionism. You have Abraham Accord. They want to like force Abraham Accord to every country.
The whole world.
But exactly to the whole world. This war is happening because Israel has managed to hack American system and deprive America of its sovereignty. Has managed to hack Britain and deprive Britain of its sovereignty. So in a sense, if I was like people in the world, I would see this war as a sequence of 7th of October theater, and that would give you a lot of knowledge. We might not have enough knowledge about today's war, but we have enough. We have compiled a lot of investigative work about 7th of October. If you see a hospital being bombed and they say that was backfire of Iranian missile, it's going to take weeks for us to verify this news. And that's what Israelis do on purpose, because they know it's not time. By the time they've done it, they move to the next phase of war. People should use their own knowledge, which was gained in the last 3 years, after 2.5 years from 7th of October. And finally, I say to Americans that Iran is not fully alone. China and Russia have been, even though they're not explicit enough to come and join the war. They don't want a world war, but they've been like helping Iran behind the scene. China has been helping. Like yesterday, the news which came that China has halted the export of diesel, which is like is going to exacerbate the market. Yeah. So and like Iran's use of satellite images from China and Russia. So in a sense, you should not underestimate Iran. Any news that you see which is about underestimating Iran, dig into it, and I promise you, the funding comes somehow from Israel or comes from Zionist lobby. So in a sense, be very careful about what you see in media and don't be duped by this image of Iran is losing imminently. That's like created in Tel Aviv to dupe American people. And the final thing I say, one important element in this war, the same way that Iranian people were an important element, and by coming to a street, by allowing themselves to be weaponized by the state, are neutralizing Israel and Tel Aviv's strategy. I think American people, especially Trump's own base, MAGA base, is a very significant element in this war. If they want, they can stop this war. If they want, they can force Trump to stop this crazy war, which will lead to America losing all its control in West Asia. America came to this area, to this region in 1990. As soon as Soviet Union was collapsed, America came here with a false flag operation, allowing Saddam to take over Kuwait and using the opportunity to turn this whole region into his bases, 25 bases in this region. From 1990 until now, Trump will destroy America's interest in this region. And that's what Tel Aviv wants. Tel Aviv wants a wasteland, wants to turn the whole West Asia into wasteland. But that means loss of a lot of jobs for American people, loss of a lot of kind of financial and economic interest for American people. So they should think, do you want to lose jobs in Alabama because people in Tel Aviv want to feel hegemonic in a region that all of the countries have become balkanized or not? So it's up to American people to free and liberate the country from the Zionist problem.
Yeah, very well said, Ali. And you said a couple of things I also wanted to actually jump in on. I'm very glad what you said about China, because we have all been very much struggling. Like, what's going on? It's very difficult to get any information on that. But we of course, all of us are hoping that behind the scenes, at least a power like China is helping. Because what I think is, and I'm going to assume you agree with me on this. I think personally that I feel so incredibly sad, emotional. I don't know how to express it for the people of West Asia, for the fact that people in West Asia have to now deal with this utter evil that's happening. I cannot speak in other words anymore. This is pure evil we're dealing with. That is literally a threat to the whole world. Let's be honest here. And in my opinion, it should not fall on the shoulders of the Iranians and the Arab resistance in the region, also, to defend against this incredibly evil empire. It's just unbelievable what we are seeing in the past 3 years. It's going beyond anything, from genocide to mass murder to killing civilians to Epstein files and pedophilia. It's just so incredibly overwhelming. And that brings me a bit to the last question for both of you is, so you said, okay, in the background, China and Russia are helping, which I think is a good thing. We have been very skeptical about that. But and you say another very important thing, Ali, about, for example, the American public and the whole MAGA base. And I want to bring this actually broader to the rest of the world, and especially the West. I see very little counter forces, to be very honest, and I'm deeply disappointed by that. For example, a strong anti-war movement, strong activism. We have activists, and you have people disrupting meetings and shouting slogans, which I think are very heroic people. Don't get me wrong. But where is that mass unrest? Where is that activism, that anti-war solidarity? I'm really feeling everybody is online on social media cheering for Iran and everything, and I'm thinking, you cannot sit at the sideline and just cheering for people who are fighting a battle for humanity. Let's be honest here. So I don't know, how do you guys see that? Where are the counter forces, Kit? Do you have any? Am I too pessimistic?
Well, I mean, I think tying together like a number of points here. I think you mentioned, Peter, that like the impact on markets was considerably less than you expected. And you also asked more generally, like, what kind of information sources people can rely on. I think you should look at, if you look at the financial media. The picture that is emerging is very, very, very different to the kind of tub thumping in the Washington Post and the New York Times, and all of this talk about precision strikes and images of supposed Iranian fighter jets being destroyed. A lot of them are dummies, of course, because people don't get rich off propaganda, and the FT is read by people who want to get rich and often have a lot of money. So actually, the picture that's emerging from the Financial Times and Bloomberg is utterly dire, actually. And it must be stressed that we're not even a week into this at this point, and already there are issues in oil and gas supply chains, fertilizer, which is already the Ukraine proxy war. Inflicted a significant hit on that, which massively increased food prices, across the Western world, with concomitant misery for average consumers. And I think that the insurance market as well has just been completely thrown off guard, and this is without factoring in a Red Sea embargo by Ansarallah in Yemen. So I mean, there are going to be cascading effects here, and as we were about to go live, or sorry, we were about to record, I read in the FT that there Qatari ministers are expecting the price of oil to go up to $150 a barrel, which is a huge increase within weeks. And this will certainly, one way or another, be lasting weeks. And Iran has demonstrated an ability to shut down, entire economies, entire airspaces, and entire bodies of water using very low-cost drones. And they're making 5,000 of those monthly at least. But so there's that aspect to it. And moreover, I think that I actually have more optimism about the prospect than Karim actually about the prospect of kind of a mass movement emerging, because all of this stuff is going to start hitting average people. And like I say, there's been no effort here to justify what's going on beyond we have to destroy the evil Islamic Republic, which I think at this stage people aren't really falling for it anyway. And if you look at polls in the US, even Trump's hardcore base, only 40% of them supported war against Iran. And it's not like the lack of rationale and reasoning for this. It does cut very deep, because the US and Israel are not promising to deliver a better form of government or even a democracy. They don't even seem to know what the end state looks like beyond total destruction. And in that context, when US soldiers are being killed and a large number of people recognize they're being killed on behalf of Israel to further Netanyahu's completely insane Greater Israel objectives, and Trump has openly called for Netanyahu to be pardoned now. I mean, it couldn't be more blatant in whose interest he's working. I think that, as casualties ratchet, as the situation gets more dangerous for the West, and as average people start getting hit pretty severely when they're already suffering due to anti-Russia sanctions, due to disruption to global trade caused by the proxy war, I think it's going to cause an enormous amount of anger that will translate into direct action. I mean, it's a small thing, but in the UK recently, the Green Party, which is by no means radical and has all sorts of positions which I think are deeply problematic, and their leader is very condemnatory of the war against Tehran, despite feeling the need to criticize the Islamic Republic as this brutal, awful dictatorship. They're surging in the polls because this is a very popular perspective, that this is a criminal war of aggression that Britain should have no part of. At a time when, as I mentioned, the credibility and legitimacy of elected governments throughout the West is at kind of rock bottom. So I mean, there are all sorts of problems the West has stored up for itself, which are coming home to roost now. The sad reality is, if you look back at many prior wars of U.S. aggression, Vietnam being a very obvious example, it wasn't instantly that major mass street protests started to engulf the US, and they reached, but when they did, they reached such an extent that there were protesters trying to break into the White House, throwing themselves over fences. And in Kissinger's autobiography, he recalls how scared Nixon was, and he was pointing to this vast milling crowd saying, "They're going to come in and get us, Henry." I can easily foresee Western powers ending up in that exact same situation, as a result of this complete madness and evil, quite frankly.
So I just going to add to what Karim said. Because Karim said it's a very sad time. It's absolutely a very sad time. I mean, over 100,000 people were kind of killed in a genocide in Gaza, and I think they want to create another Gaza out of Iranian cities. However, I'm not that. I mean, while I'm sad, but at the same time, for the first time ever, I'm optimistic because at least. While America and Israel are trying to destroy a country in the region, at least there is a force of resistance. Remember, this is not the first war. Remember, they destroyed Egypt, the biggest Arab country in 1967 and then 1973, and then they forced it to surrender in Camp David in 1979, and then Egypt couldn't do anything. It's a broken country now, which is kind of with a broken economy. Then they went for Lebanon, they went for like Jordan, they went for Syria. They got rid of Syria, but at least what's happening now is a first time in the history of this region since the inception of Israel that a country has enough strength to fight back. And I think that can change the calculation. That can really be decisive for the fate of this settler colonialism in this region. And I promise you, if this war goes longer, many people in the region may may have uprising against their own countries. We've already seen demonstrations in Bahrain, a country with 75% Shiites who've been constantly oppressed. The biggest demonstration proportional demonstration in the world history. 75% of people came on the streets of Bahrain during Arab Spring, and with the order of America, with the tacit agreement of Obama administration, they were massively repressed, and then Saudi tanks turned up to the streets of Bahrain. Now they are coming up again. Same can happen in Jordan, a country of 70%, 73% Palestinian population who are being treated as second-class citizens, and they were like full of rage during this like Gaza genocide, and they couldn't do anything. So in a sense, Trump has played with the fire. Trump is not only jeopardizing his and his pals' money in Persian Gulf countries, like Witkoff has a lot of money in Qatar. Jared Kushner has a lot of kind of business dealing with Saudis. Not only that, but they are damaging the regional order they created after Second World War, because from Jordan, from like a Bitter Lake agreement with Saudis, that all can go back. It can be a massive blowback. It can accelerate Americans' decline it can double it and triple it. So he doesn't know what he's doing. That's why China and Russia are just waiting there to go and like harvest the benefits after this war. So in a sense, I'm not pessimistic as much as you are. I think because Iran has prepared itself for this moment. And Iran's motto has been very clear from day one of revolution: no American troops in the region, Palestinian right for self-determination. Every big thing which happened in this region, every time that Israeli propaganda and American propaganda tried to confront the regional country with Iran and telling them that Iran is a source of evil, Iran is a source of exporting terrorism, Iran is trying to be hegemonic, Iran came out and said, we have no beef with any of the countries in the region. We don't care about Sunni, Shiite, Christian, atheists. We have only two agendas: no American troops in the region and Palestinian self-determination. And actually, for the first time ever, I see the light at the end of the tunnel. I know it's going to be very costly, but if people in the region and globally, people understand what is at stake here, there's also opportunity. Wherever there's power, wherever there's oppression, there's power. And at this point, we see a lot of popular energy in Iran and across the region to deal with this.
Wow, that is the best way I could possibly have imagined to end this on an actually hopeful note. I'm kind of amazed. It does kind of tie into the Mao quote, though. The status quo ante was horrendous. So when you have a horrendous status quo, then chaos is really an opportunity for an improvement upon the awful status quo. So I know we've gone over 10 minutes over the hour, but thank you guys so much for being so generous with your time, and I hope we can get together again sometime in the future to discuss further.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for inviting
Thank you
us.
so much.
Static crackles, voices rise. Truth breaks through their velvet lies. A screen of fire, a shield of steel. BettBeat media makes you feel. No borders, no change. No silence,